There are moments in history when human strength is not measured by the size of armies or the reach of empires, but by the endurance of memory. The story of the Yoruba people is one of those moments, an epic of survival that stretches across oceans, across chains, and across centuries. It is the story of how a culture torn from its homeland refused to die. It is proof that the soul of a people can travel through storms, survive oppression, and still rise singing in a foreign land. The Yoruba did not just survive, they transformed pain into poetry, captivity into creation, and loss into legacy. When ships carried them across the Atlantic, they did not only take bodies, they took spirits. They tried to strip away names, languages, and gods, but there are things that no power can erase. The Yoruba carried their world within them, hidden in songs, in rhythms, in the way they greeted one another, in the quiet remembrance of ancestors. When they arrived in Brazil, in Cuba, in Haiti, the world thought they had been broken. But inside them burned an invisible fire, a sacred rhythm that no whip could silence. It was not just culture, it was identity wrapped in endurance, belief disguised as ritual, truth whispered through generations until it became song again. In Brazil, they called it candomblé. In Cuba, it became Santería. In Haiti, it merged with the island's heartbeat to become Vodou. Outsiders misunderstood these practices, feared them, and often demonized them. But within those rituals was not darkness, it was survival. Each drumbeat, each chant, each offering was a bridge between two worlds. The world that was lost and the one that had to be built anew. The Yoruba did not forget, they adapted. They disguised their gods behind the faces of saints, merged their language with that of their captors, and preserved the essence of their faith through creativity and resilience. To understand this is to understand the strength of cultural memory. The Yoruba spirit teaches that what defines a people is not what they possess, but what they remember. Even when temples were destroyed, when elders were killed, when children were separated, they found ways to keep the flame alive. They hid sacred knowledge in the rhythm of the drum, in the steps of a dance, in the call and response of work songs. The Orushas, the divine energies that guided them, found new names, new languages, and new songs, but their power remained the same. Across Brazil's Bahia, Yoruba traditions blended with indigenous and Portuguese influences, but the heart of the culture never faded. It taught strength through unity, honor through service, and identity through remembrance. It taught that even in a foreign land, the human spirit could plant roots and grow again. In the streets of Havana, in the ceremonies of Matanzas, in the songs of Haiti's mountains, that same rhythm continued, an echo of home that time and distance could not silence. Every culture that survives oppression carries a message for the future, that freedom is not only a political act, but a spiritual one. The Yoruba taught the world that identity is not lost through displacement, it is carried within the heart like a seed. When planted in new soil, it grows differently, but it still bears the fruit of its origin. The rituals may change form, but the essence, the respect for ancestors, the harmony with nature, the balance between the seen and unseen, remains eternal. The Yoruba in the diaspora became teachers without classrooms, philosophers without titles, priests without temples. They passed down knowledge through storytelling, through rhythm, through community gatherings that disguised wisdom as celebration. Each festival, each chant, each shared meal was a declaration, we are still here. They taught their children that dignity cannot be stolen, that the spirit of a people cannot be chained. Even when enslaved, they refused to be conquered, for they knew that true defeat comes not from loss of freedom, but from loss of faith in oneself. The survival of Yoruba culture is not only an African story, it is a human story. It tells us that the spirit of creation cannot be destroyed, that art and faith are stronger than violence and fear. It reminds us that every human being carries within them an unbreakable core, a rhythm that beats through history, connecting us all. The Yoruba did not just preserve their past, they enriched the future. They gave the world new music, new languages of soul, new ways of seeing divinity in everything that lives. Samba, rumba, jazz, blues, all echo traces of their rhythm. Their influence flows through the veins of world culture, often unnoticed but always present, like the heartbeat that sustains life. When we look at the Yoruba legacy, we see what resilience truly means. It is not the absence of suffering, It is the ability to turn suffering into wisdom. It is the courage to keep dancing when the world tries to silence your song. It is the grace to rebuild identity from the fragments of loss. In every nation where Yoruba descendants live today, Nigeria, Brazil, Cuba, Haiti, Trinidad, the United States, the story continues. It is a story that says no matter how far you are scattered, you are never lost if you remember who you are. Culture is not just tradition. It is resistance. It is a declaration that identity matters, that memory is sacred. The Yoruba people understood that to lose culture is to lose, so they wove it into every part of life, into greetings, into festivals, into names, into art. They turned ordinary acts into rituals of remembrance, and in doing so, they gave the world a masterclass in endurance. They showed that power does not come from domination, but from the quiet strength to keep creating, loving, and believing. The modern world often forgets this truth. We chase progress and technology but forget the wisdom of roots. We build towers and networks but neglect the power of shared history. The Yoruba story calls us back to remember that culture is not a relic of the past, but a living bridge to the future. It reminds us that connection to ancestry gives us balance, that honoring where we come from strengthens where we are going. It tells every person, no matter their origin, that within them lies a heritage of strength, waiting to be awakened. When you listen to the Yoruba drum, you hear more than rhythm, you hear history speaking. You hear the heartbeat of a people who crossed oceans, but never lost their song. You hear the whisper of ancestors who refused to surrender their life. And if you listen deeply, you realize that their story is our story, because every human being knows exile in some form, being misunderstood, displaced, or unseen. And yet, like the Yoruba, we are called to rise again, to carry our truth wherever life takes us. So when you see the festivals of Brazil, the ceremonies of Cuba, the dances of Haiti, do not see them as remnants of the past. See them as miracles of survival, as testaments to the power of memory. They are living proof that culture cannot be enslaved, that spirit cannot be broken. They are reminders that humanity's greatest strength lies not in power or possession, but in endurance and creativity. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson the Yoruba have given the world, that what survives is what adapts, what endures is what remembers, and what defines us is not where we are but who we are. When storms of history tried to wash them away, they became the tide itself, moving, changing, but always returning to the shore of their essence. Their story tells us that survival is not enough. We must live with purpose, carry our truth, and pass it forward. Because every generation stands on the shoulders of those who came before. And just as the Yoruba turned pain into power, we too can turn struggle into strength, loss into legacy, and displacement into discovery. The Yoruba people did not just survive, they taught the world how to survive with dignity. They turned memory into art, history into heartbeat, and tragedy into triumph. And that is the message for us all. Your roots are your power, your past is your compass, and your culture is your crown. Protect it, nurture it, and let it remind you that no matter how far you travel, you are never truly lost. True strength is not the kind that shouts from the mountaintop or parades through the streets. It is the quiet resilience that endures when the world tries to silence you. It is the invisible force that keeps a people standing long after their homes have burned, their names have been changed, and their freedoms have been stripped away. The Yoruba people have shown the world that true power is not measured by how much one can take, but by how much one can keep. Keep of one's heart, one's culture, one's dignity. It is easy to build monuments of stone and call them strength, but stone can crack, empires can fall, and kingdoms can vanish into dust. What does not vanish is spirit. Spirit is the one inheritance that cannot be stolen, the one treasure that cannot be bought. It moves through generations like wind through leaves, unseen yet alive, strong yet gentle, silent yet eternal. When the Yoruba were taken from their homeland, it seemed like everything was lost. They were scattered to strange lands, forced into servitude, stripped of language, and made to believe that their gods, their customs, and their songs no longer mattered. Yet in that moment of deepest despair, something within them refused to surrender. They carried in their hearts an unspoken truth that identity is not what you wear or where you live, it is what you remember and what you refuse to let die. In the midst of chains and foreign tongues, they remembered the rhythm of the drum. They remembered the words of their ancestors. They remembered the orishas, the divine energies that connected them to all of life. And so even in silence they continued to speak through memory. What cannot be broken does not always roar, it hums quietly within. For the Yoruba, survival was not an accident, it was an act of defiance. They took the pain that was meant to erase them and turned it into wisdom that would echo through centuries. They found ways to preserve meaning where others saw none. Every drumbeat, every story, every gesture of respect was an act of rebellion, a whisper to the future saying, "We are still here." That whisper became a wave, crossing oceans and generations until it became song again, in Brazil, in Cuba, in Haiti, and beyond. And through that song, the spirit endured. There is a kind of strength that builds nations, and there is a deeper kind that builds souls. The Yoruba carried the latter. They understood that even if you take away the land, you cannot take away the knowledge of how to live with honor. Even if you take away the language, you cannot erase the rhythm of the heart. Even if you take away the temple, you cannot destroy the sacredness within the human being. This is the strength of identity, the quiet armor of memory. It does not need to be proclaimed, for it speaks through every gesture of kindness, every dance, every prayer disguised as a song, every name whispered in a language that refuses to die. The spirit that cannot be broken is the seed that grows in impossible soil. The Yoruba planted their seed in every place they went, and it grew, sometimes unseen, sometimes misunderstood, but always alive. It grew into music, into festivals, into community, into shared strength. It taught others who had also been broken that there is a power greater than oppression, the power of remembrance. Because when you remember who you are, you cannot be enslaved forever. Chains may bind the body, but they cannot bind the soul that knows its origin. True strength is not measured by how long you stand when everything is easy, but by how often you rise when everything is taken. The Yoruba rose again and again, and with each rise they carried something precious forward, the knowledge that identity is enduring. Their language traveled in proverbs and prayers. Their wisdom hid inside songs. Their gods found new names but kept the same essence. And when generations later the descendants danced in Brazil or sang in Cuba, the ancestors smiled, for they knew the promise had been kept. Nothing that was sacred was lost. The world often misunderstands what real power is. Power is not the ability to conquer, it is the ability to continue. Power is not in dominance, but in persistence. The Yoruba culture, scattered and suppressed, did not just survive, it flourished. Because it was rooted in something deeper than circumstance. It was rooted in community and respect, in the eternal rhythm of balance between humanity and nature. That rhythm cannot be killed because it is woven into life itself. It is in the heartbeat, in the earth's pulse, in the ocean's waves. It is the same rhythm that carried the Yoruba spirit across the Atlantic and brought it back home again through the voices of their descendants. What remains after everything is taken is what defines us. When the ships sailed and the lands were left behind, the Yoruba carried their essence in silence. They carried their gods in memory, their stories in their hearts, their pride in the way they walked and the way they spoke to each other in kindness. They remembered that power is not in having control, it is in not losing oneself. And because they did not lose themselves, they became immortal. Their influence spread into art, into music, into language, into the way people saw the world. And without realizing it, entire nations began to echo their spirit. When the Yoruba say a river that forgets its source will dry up, they mean that to endure one must remember. And they remembered. They remembered in the way they loved, in the way they sang, in the way they treated the earth as sacred. That remembrance became the bridge between generations, keeping the connection alive when all else seemed lost. And that is the essence of unbreakable spirit, to remember when the world tries to make you forget. There is a lesson here for everyone, not just for those who carry Yoruba blood. It is a lesson about identity, about pride, about the power of heritage. It teaches us that culture is not just history, it is a living force, a guide through chaos, a reminder that we belong to something larger than ourselves. It teaches that when you know where you come from, no storm can make you lose direction. The Yoruba people have shown that even in exile one can be whole, even in silence one can sing, even in loss one can still give meaning. That is the kind of strength the world needs now, not the strength of domination, but the strength of preservation, not the arrogance of power, but the quiet dignity of endurance. They proved that when everything material is stripped away, what remains, The spirit, the culture, the heart is more powerful than any empire ever built. And so when everything is taken, what remains is what cannot be broken. What remains is the song that never stopped, the drum that still beats, the name that still carries weight. What remains is the invisible thread that connects the living to the ancestors, the past to the present, the broken to the whole. That is the Yoruba spirit, and it is the spirit of all humanity, the will to endure, to create, and to rise again. Across vast oceans and generations, culture became the compass that guided the lost and the displaced, the wounded and the wandering. When everything familiar was stripped away, the land, the language, the home, the songs that once echoed through the forests and rivers, there was still one thing that could not be taken: memory. It lived quietly in the pulse of the heart, in the rhythm of the drum that refused to go silent, in the gestures passed down between parent and child, in the stories whispered at night about a place that still existed in spirit even if it had been erased on maps. The Yoruba people, torn from their homeland and scattered across continents, carried within them something more enduring than gold or stone. They carried rhythm, and that rhythm was their way back to themselves. It was not only the beat of music, it was the beat of identity. Culture became their light through darkness. In Brazil, in Cuba, in Haiti, and in every place where they were forced to start again, they planted the seeds of remembrance in the soil of their new world. Though they had lost their land, they never lost their direction, because rhythm cannot be enslaved. It exists beyond the grasp of power. It moves through bodies and memories, reminding every generation that no matter how far they have traveled, their essence is still connected to something ancient, something unbreakable. When the world demanded silence, they answered with song. When the world imposed erasure, they responded with preservation. That is how memory works. It defies time, it refuses extinction. The rhythm became their language when words were forbidden. It was spoken through drums, through dance, through ritual and celebration. The sound of the bata drum in Brazil was not just music, it was history speaking in code, telling stories of gods and heroes, of struggle and victory. In Cuba, the same rhythms merged with new influences but kept the same spirit, creating Santería, a faith of resilience and remembering. In Haiti, through the beat of the sacred drums, Vodou was born, a tapestry woven from African memory and Caribbean endurance. In every sound, in every step of the dance, there was a message. We may be far from home, but home still lives within us. They became architects of cultural survival, building invisible bridges across time and space. These bridges connected ancestors to descendants, the old world to the new. Every ritual was a bridge. Every melody was a path leading back to roots buried deep in African soil. When a mother sang a lullaby in a foreign land, her voice carried not only comfort but also the spirit of generations before her. The melody whispered to her child that though the world had changed, their essence had not. Memory is not just remembering what was, it is the act of keeping what is sacred alive even when the world tries to extinguish it. Generations passed and still the rhythm continued. It evolved, adapting to each place and time, taking new forms but never losing its heart. Samba in Brazil, rumba in Cuba, the sacred drums of Haiti, all were branches of the same ancient tree, nourished by roots that refused to die. The Yoruba spirit, resilient and unyielding, became the invisible thread that tied together the scattered hearts of a people. It taught them that identity is not a place you stand on, it is a song you carry within. When they lost their language, the rhythm spoke for them. When they lost their temples, the rhythm became their prayer. When they lost their freedom, the rhythm became their defiance. That is why the world still dances to their heartbeat today, often without even realizing the depth of its meaning. Behind every carnival, behind every drum circle, behind every pulse of Afro-Caribbean music lies a legacy of endurance, of transformation, of survival against the odds. It is the sound of a people who refused to vanish. And this rhythm was not just sound, it was connection. It connected the living to the dead, the enslaved to the free, the past to the present. It carried knowledge and wisdom in forms that could not be written down but could be felt and remembered. Through rhythm they encoded emotion, history, and hope. The beat of the drum became a universal language of resilience that every generation could understand. Memory became the longest bridge between what was lost and what endured. It stretched across oceans, across centuries, across barriers of race and nation. It reminded those who had forgotten where they came from that identity is not lost in exile. It simply changes its form. The Yoruba taught the world that the body itself can be a temple, that every movement, every dance, every ritual can hold within it the spirit of 1,000 years. And so even in lands that once denied them their humanity, they built living temples from their own being. In the markets of Bahia, the rhythms echo the songs of ancient Ife. In the streets of Havana, the drums tell stories older than the cities themselves. In the ceremonies of Port-au-Prince, the songs rise like a call to the ancestors, summoning courage and continuity. And across the world today, from Africa to the Americas, people still dance to those rhythms, often without realizing that they are participating in an unbroken tradition of survival, a living memory that has crossed every attempt to destroy it. That is the power of culture. It is the map that remains when borders shift and names change. It guides a people when the world tries to scatter them. It reminds them that though the journey may be long and painful, they are never lost. The Yoruba people showed that memory is not a weakness. It is the strongest form of resistance. It is the thread that sews the pieces of a broken world back together. Across oceans and generations, culture became their compass. Even when they lost their land, they did not lose their rhythm, because rhythm is eternal. It is the pulse that links one generation to another, the heartbeat that keeps the spirit alive when everything else has fallen silent. Memory became their bridge, the longest bridge humanity has ever built, stretching from the first villages along the Niger River to the shores of the New World. And on that bridge walked millions of souls who refused to forget who they were. They proved that even when everything tangible is taken away, the intangible, the rhythm, the memory, the culture will outlast it all. That is how nations are reborn. That is how people remain whole. And that is why even today, when the drums play and the people dance, the ancestors rise again, not as ghosts, but as rhythm itself, alive, undefeated, eternal.